On June 25, 1876, as Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer surveyed the massive Native American encampment in the Little Bighorn River Valley, one of his Crow scouts warned him with chilling precision. "There are more Sioux than you have bullets," the scout said. Custer dismissed the warning. He divided his command of 600 men into 3 separate groups and ordered the attack on what he believed was a village of no more than 800 to 1,000 warriors. Within hours, Custer and 268 of his troopers lay dead on the Montana hillsides. For decades afterward, the popular narrative blamed the defeat on primitive savages who had somehow overwhelmed modern soldiers. The soldiers carried superior Springfield carbines and Colt revolvers, the story went, but were simply outnumbered by Indians armed mostly with bows, arrows, and antiquated muskets. That narrative was false. Physical evidence scattered across the battlefield told a different story entirely. Cartridge cases, bullets, and metal fragments left in the soil revealed that the United States Army 7th Cavalry had not been defeated by primitively armed warriors. They had been outgunned by Native American fighters carrying some of the most advanced repeating rifles available in North America. The weapons themselves did not cause Custer's defeat, but understanding what was actually fired that day reveals how thoroughly mythology had obscured reality. Each cavalryman who rode toward the Little Bighorn carried a Springfield Model 1873 carbine and a Colt single-action Army revolver. Standard issue was 100 rounds of carbine ammunition and 24 rounds for the revolver. These were considered modern, reliable weapons. The Springfield had been selected after exhaustive military trials in the early 1870s that tested 89 different rifles and carbines from manufacturers across America and Europe. The examination included entries from Peabody, Spencer, Freeman, Elliott, Mauser, Ward-Burton, Remington, and Sharps. The board conducting the trials included Major Marcus Reno, who would survive the battle that killed Custer. The Springfield Model 1873, known as the trapdoor because of its hinged breech block, was a single-shot weapon. It fired a .45 caliber copper case cartridge containing a 400 5-grain bullet propelled by 55 grains of black powder. The carbine version carried by cavalry troops had a 22-inch barrel and weighed 7 pounds. Its effective range was under 300 yards. Though with proper training, a soldier could score hits out to 600 yards. The weapon could be fired 12 to 15 times per minute by a well-trained marksman. At 100 yards, the Springfield achieved 100% accuracy in military tests. At 300 yards, accuracy dropped to 75%. At 600 yards, it still hit the target 32% of the time. The trapdoor Springfield could hurl a slug more than 1,000 yards with proper elevation. The Colt single-action Army revolver, adopted alongside the Springfield in 1873, fired 6.45 caliber metallic cartridges with 28 grains of black powder behind a 250-grain bullet. It had a 7.5-inch barrel and a muzzle velocity of 810 feet per second, with 400 foot-pounds of energy. Its effective range dropped off rapidly beyond 60 yards. The Colt was rugged and dependable. The standard military issue had a blue finish, case-hardened hammer and frame, and walnut grips. Soldiers gave it various nicknames. To cavalrymen, it was a thumbbuster. To lawmen, a peacemaker or equalizer. To civilians, a hog leg or plow handle. Deeply narrated. Lieutenant James Calhoun of Company L recorded his satisfaction with the new weapons in his diary on July 1, 1874. He reported that the command received the new Springfield weapons and ammunition today. They appear to provide a lot of satisfaction. Although officers may acquire personal firearms, the majority of troopers were happy with their standard-issue weaponry. Custer himself carried a Remington .50 caliber sporting rifle with octagonal barrel and 2 revolvers that were not standard issue, possibly Webley British Bulldog double-action models with white handles. Captain Thomas French of Company M carried a .50 caliber Springfield his men called Long Tom. Sergeant John Ryan used a custom .45 caliber, 15-pound Sharps telescopic rifle specially made for him. Private Henry Bailey of Company: I preferred a Dexter Smith breech-loading single-barreled shotgun. These personal choices mattered little in the final outcome. What the Army did not know, and what would only become clear through physical evidence recovered from the battlefield, was the extent and sophistication of Native American armament. In 1876, survivors of the battle reported that Indians carried a variety of weapons including bows, arrows, old muzzle loaders, and modern repeating rifles. Major Marcus Reno claimed that the Indians had Winchester rifles and were pumping bullets into the cavalry column. These accounts were generally dismissed or downplayed by many who assumed most warriors relied on traditional weapons or outdated trade muskets. However, a thorough analysis of the battlefield showed different. More than 2,000 ammunition cases, bullets, and fragments were found at the location. These originated from at least 45 different kinds of firearms, or at least 371 unique weapons, according to analysis. It was quite diverse. Sharps rifles, Smith & Wesson revolvers, Evans rifles, Henry repeaters, Winchester models 1866 and 1873, Remingtons, Ballards, Maynards, Stars, Spencers, Enfields, Forehand and Wadsworth revolvers, Army Springfields, and Colts of various caliber were all used by the Indians. On Custer's field, the square-mile section where Custer's 5 companies died, physical evidence indicated 69 individual Army Springfields had been present. Evidence also indicated 62 Indian .44 caliber Henry repeating rifles and 27 Sharps .50 caliber rifles. In total, the ground told a story of at least 134 Indian firearms versus 81 Army weapons in that specific area. The soldiers had been outnumbered approximately 8-1 in warriors. They had also been outgunned in terms of available firepower. The Henry rifle and its successor, the Winchester Model 1866, were the primary repeating weapons carried by the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Both fired .44 caliber Henry rimfire cartridges. The Henry used a 216-grain bullet with 25 grains of powder, while the Winchester 1866 used a 200-grain bullet with 28 grains. Muzzle velocity was approximately 1,125 feet per second with 570 foot-pounds of energy. The Henry's magazine held 13 rounds. The Winchester 1866 carbine held 13, and the rifle version held 17. The Winchester 1866 featured a spring cover on the right side of the receiver, whereas cartridges were placed straight into the front of the Henry magazine. A warrior with one of these weapons could fire 15 times before a cavalry trooper with a Springfield could fire twice. The Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg went into battle with what he called a six-shooter and later captured a Springfield carbine and 40 rounds of ammunition. The Minneconjou warrior One Bull, Sitting Bull's nephew, owned an old muzzle loader. Only bows and arrows were used by the Cheyenne Big Beaver and the Hunkpapa Iron Hawk. The fight began with a Winchester and an Oglala named Eagle Elk. White Cow Bull, also an Oglala, claimed to have a repeater. The variety was genuine and widespread. How Native Americans acquired these weapons remained deliberately obscure. Western traders, when questioned by military investigators in 1876, solemnly swore they never sold or traded repeating rifles to Indians. The Army and Navy Journal suggested sarcastically that perhaps Winchester should sue the tribes for patent infringement, since if no one would admit providing the rifles, the Indians must be manufacturing them independently. The reality was that repeaters reached Indian hands through multiple channels. Some were captured in battles. Some were purchased from unscrupulous traders willing to ignore regulations for profit. Some were acquired through intermediaries. Some were gifts or trade goods from tribes that had better relationships with white merchants. The paper trail was deliberately obscured by everyone involved in the illicit trade. At the actual ranges where most of the Little Bighorn fighting occurred, the differences in weapon performance mattered less than expected. The Henrys and Winchesters were nearly useless beyond 300 yards. At 100 yards, however, they matched the Springfield's 100% accuracy. At 300 yards, the repeater's accuracy dropped to about 40%, compared to the Springfield's 75%. The single-shot Springfield had an accuracy advantage at medium ranges of 200 to 500 yards. The repeater's advantage was volume of fire at close range. The problem was that most of the battle was fought at long range, beyond 500 yards, where neither weapon system performed particularly well. The slow muzzle velocity of the Springfield meant a high bullet trajectory that made hitting distant targets extremely difficult. The repeaters were even worse at those distances. In a battle fought primarily from close range, the Indians' repeaters would have been devastating. In a battle fought primarily at long range, the Springfield's accuracy advantage would have mattered more. The Little Bighorn was fought at ranges where both weapons were operating near their limits, which suggests the weapons themselves were not the determining factor. The other Native American weapon that played a significant role was the bow and arrow. General George Crook, commenting after the battle, noted that Sioux warriors were more effective on horseback with bows than with single-shot trade muskets. But he added that when they acquired breech-loading rifles with metallic cartridges, allowing them to load and fire from horseback with ease, they became 10,000 times more formidable. Bows had advantages. They were silent. They could fire high-arcing volleys that dropped arrows into positions behind cover. Arrows could be launched rapidly. Some warriors said they lofted high-trajectory arrows to fall among the troopers, while remaining hidden behind hills and ravines. Dead soldiers found with multiple arrows in their bodies were likely shot at very close range, possibly after they were already wounded or dead. The long range at which most of the fighting occurred did not allow the bow and arrow a prominent role, but at close quarters they remained lethal. One persistent claim about the battle was that the Army's Springfield carbines suffered from widespread extractor failures. The story went that soft copper cartridge cases expanded when heated from repeated firing, then stuck in the chamber when extraction was attempted. Troopers supposedly had to pry out stuck cases with knives, leaving them defenseless. This narrative fit neatly with explanations for the defeat. The physical evidence did not support it. Of the recovered cartridge cases examined, only about 2% showed evidence of extraction problems. While some failures certainly occurred, particularly in the extreme heat and dust of the battle, the problem was not significant enough to have been a determining factor. The cavalry carbine version of the Springfield did not include a cleaning rod, which could have helped clear stuck cases. But this was a minor issue compared to the larger tactical and command failures that day. Another claim was that Custer should have brought Gatling guns. General Nelson Miles, commenting later, dismissed this idea bluntly. He said he was not surprised that Custer declined to bring the Gatlings, calling them worthless for Indian fighting. The guns were heavy, slow, prone to jamming, and required wagons for transport. They would have slowed the column and provided little practical advantage against a mobile enemy fighting from dispersed positions across broken terrain.